Hello and welcome to Teching It Up with Mark. Today we're going to try to build a whole system from scratch. So in this example, I decided to do an HR request system where employees will be submitting their request to HR, so requests or questions, and then HR gives them feedback, and then that goes back to the requester and the loop goes on. So if we look at how the flow is going to go, we're going to have an employee request, add a new HR request. I don't know why that keeps on flipping off. And then that's going to go to the HR team to review the request. They're going to give an answer. The employee can either accept that answer and close the request, or they're going to say that they need some clarification, respond back, and the cycle can continue and keep on looping. To do this, we're going to create two main tables here. One with HR request, which will have the user name and display name, the request date, the request subject, the status of the request. So we'll probably just do open, closed, or abandoned, something like that. And we're going to have a responses table. So this way, this will be the child table where we can keep multiple responses. And there we'll have just the request ID from the HR request ID, the response ID, so that will be the primary key on this table, a response date, probably date time, response details, so that will be the actual message, and just created by username and display name. And we also have 1 bit to distinguish if it's from HR or not. We'll have 2 forms for this example, depending on how far we get. So that will be the request form, which will have an item view that will just have the request data fields, and we'll have a list view to add request comments. Maybe we'll add a little bit more to that too. And then we'll do a dashboard form. So let's get to work. Okay, I'm here on my virtual machine. I'll just delete this and create new folders. This is not yet completed. Won't let me complete that. So we'll go new category, and we'll call this HR request system. Or HR request, doesn't matter. From there, we'll just add our folder structure. So this will be forms, views, getting a little pause in my VM here, and SmartObjects. Now, I didn't mention before specifically, but we will be creating this in SQL. You could do the same thing in SharePoint or any other backend data source, as long as you can connect to it, for that matter. So what I'll do first is open up my SQL Server Management Studio, which is running on my K2 server. That will take a minute to open up. We already have a database for my applications here. So I'll go to my database, K2 Applications is the name of it. And we already have several tables. Now, before I actually create the tables, I'm just going to add a script to create schema to separate this. So that will just be a simple create schema in the name of HR request. Looks like it's spelled right. Schema is created. Okay. The next thing I want to do is add the tables that I had from the slides earlier. So I'm just going to my other screen and grabbing that directly out the presentation. We'll probably need to make a couple of adjustments when we actually try to run it here. So first of all, I'll throw this in the schema that we have with a dot there. We have the request ID as an int as a primary key and also an identity seed there. So this will allow us to generate all the other methods in K2 automatically. So all the CRUD methods, create, read, update, delete. We have the employee username and the employee display name. I usually like to keep those separately. It's just a little bit more convenient than looking that up. The request date. I'm just going to actually make this a date time without the default. There. Subject, 500 characters should be enough for the subject, and the status. And this status too will just manually add. So let's try running that. Execute. Looks like it ran successfully. And now if we refresh our list here, we can see the table, of course with our columns there. Now we'll add our second table too, which will be our child table. Also put this in our HR request schema, just for some good housekeeping here. We'll take a look at the columns again. Response ID, request ID. I'm going to allow this to be null too. It's just a little bit easier. A lot of times with K2, we don't end up doing hard database rules. We lose a little bit of flexibility in the application. We actually manage those rules ourselves in the database. Response date, I'll also take out the default here. Response details, this time we have an nvarchar max. Created by username, created by display name, and from HR. So that will just be a yes, no based on if it's from HR or not. So we'll highlight that, execute that, and we'll go and create a service instance for this now. So now that the data is in the database with the schemes, we could actually go ahead and start using that. So I'll jump to K2 management. I'll refresh this page. Was open for a while, is likely why I got that. We'll go to service instances. We'll take a minute here. IIS might be refreshing. Good. And we'll go to add. The display name will be HR request system. We could probably add this to something that we had done already. So to a service instance that we already have. But for this demo of going through everything, I will add that directly here. This will be SQL Server. Authentication mode, we're going to leave as a service account because I know that the service account has access. We'll try keeping that at localhost. I'm not sure if it's going to give me an issue here. And the database we want was from here, K2 applications. Applications. Let's see if this gives us any trouble. Well, it says it's created. Great. So now that we have the service instance created, that means that we will be able to see those tables in K2 and create smart objects. So I'm going to jump back over to the Nintex designer where we had everything before. I'm going to go into my smart objects folder and I'm going to go new smart object. I'm going to go the project name, so HR request, and this will be HR request. This will be an advanced smart object. I'll click create. From here, I can find my service instance to the left. And I already see this HR request here. I'm just going to pull that over, create all, click finish. We see all the CRUD methods here, and we see all the properties. One thing I'm going to do in addition is uncheck this required field. This is for the, if we have this checked, it will give us some issues when we try to use the create method because we don't have a primary key yet, and that will be generated. And also I think during the list methods too, it might give us some issues. right. Click finish. We have our HR request, and now we need our child item too. So I'll just go back here, do another smart object, HR request. Take that space out, and this time we want the child table name, which we named responses. This will also be an advanced smart object. So I'll click create. From my service instances to the left, I'll find that table. And instead of mapping this out, once again, method by method, I'm just going to take this and pull it into here. Click create all to create the fields. Finish. Good. We see all the CRUD methods. So that means the primary key and the identity seed were set correctly. And I'm going to once again uncheck this required and click finish. Okay, great. Moving right along. We're next going to create the item view for the HR request itself. So I will actually do that by designing a view from that. So we'll say HR request item view. Okay, you can see it mapped the data source for us already. And now I'll click create labels and controls. I'll keep it at 2 columns for now. Might make more sense as 1 later on, but we'll do this as simple as possible. And we will take out request ID because we don't need this visible to the user. Employee name, we'll auto-populate that for the user. So we'll actually keep that in. The request date, we'll leave that in, but we'll hard code it. Request subject, we'll leave that in. And we'll put the colons to the left. Let's take a look, see how this works. Looks pretty good. What we want here though is actually something else. So we'll auto-populate the user's name from the SmartForm controls itself. So let me go back, delete this, and we'll also, and from there I'll just instead put in a data label. We won't allow in the system, to keep it simple, users to request from another user. And we'll call this here data label user display name. We could set this to a field, and I might as well. Employee display name. And I'm going to actually rename this employee display name. Good. We don't need to do anything else with that one. Request date. We could actually default this to now. And we'll make it read only. And request subject we'll keep as is. So I'll just save that. And we'll add some rules. So the first rule we want, well, I'm going to work a little bit backwards here. The first thing we want is a parameter. So this is going to be populated once we create the item, and this will also use to populate the item. So we'll put in request ID here. ID. And we'll keep that as text. Int would make sense. I don't think it really makes too big of a difference. And we'll add a rule here. The first rule we want to do is initialize. So that when the view executes the initialize method, so this will be the first rule that's actually run when the form is returned to a browser. There are some server events that we can run earlier than that, but there does seem to be some gotchas with that, so I usually just stick to the initialize event. So what we're going to do here is first, when the view is initialized, check if there's a parameter specified, the request ID. If a view parameter has been specified, we'll go in one direction, and then I'm just going to add the else while I'm here. And if not, we're going to do something else. So if the request has been specified, first we're going to execute a method on the view. When you execute a method on the view, you'll get all the item methods or single methods as choices from the smart object. So in this case, I have, you can see this little green icon here, create, delete, read, and update, not list, because this is an item view. And we also have some methods from the view itself that we can use, like clear, collapse, things like that. So what we're going to use here is the read method. We're going to take the ID from the parameter, and then we're just going to auto map this to output everything from the item that it got. Now, in the other case that we have here, so this is a case for a new request that's been created already, and the else will be a new request. In there, I'll just put in a transfer data. And in the data label for employee display name, from these system values here, I'll put in the current user display name. These ones should be populated already. And I'm actually going to do this also into the smart object itself. So display name and username, which is name in K2. We'll click OK. We could do that on created too. Shouldn't really make too big of a difference. And we'll click OK. So we have the initialize method. I'm just going to click finish and run this view by itself with this runtime URL link. It'll take a minute, and we see the date defaulted, and administrator is my username now. So that's what we have. And we also have this box for request subject. Okay, so I'm popping back over to edit this view. You can see that this actually ended up in the wrong folder because we created it from here. So just put it in the current folder. I'm going to move that over to views, click OK, and go back to editing this. Now we want to have one more rule here that we're actually going to make an unbound rule to save the data, save or update, or create or update. So I'll just click add rule, and this will be an unbound rule. And usually we start with our unbound rules with the @ sign, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to call this create or update. From there, we'll use the same conditions that we used in the initialize method. So if a view parameter has been specified, request ID, and then I'll just grab the else here. Then we'll go to actions. So if we're creating or updating, if a request ID has been specified already, I'm going to go ahead and use the update method because we'll be updating something. And we'll just go to auto map that. And we don't need any output mappings. And there is nothing to grab from this method anyways. And in the else, I'll use the create. So here we can auto map. Let's see, this should have grabbed everything from the smart object. We could directly map things here too. And for example, status, we'll put new here. And this output mapping, this step is very important. We're just going to map this back to the parameter. That way we can update this multiple times if needed. Click OK. Click OK. Finish. I have this open still in the other tab, so I'm just going to refresh this and try it again. Oh, we don't actually have a way to test this method though. So I'm going to go add something to this. So what I'm going to do here is click add a row below. I'm going to merge these cells. And I wouldn't always do this, but I think it's something good to show here. I'm going to add a table here. Sure, 3 by 3 is fine. Table, call it debug. There. And I'm also going to make this not visible by unchecking the visible. Save it. Now for our label here, I'm just going to say what I want in my debug table. So maybe I would put status in there. We'll actually add status, label status, in case that's not visible somewhere. Call it status. And there we'll put a data label of data label status. We'll map this to the status field so we don't have to populate that. And then the other thing I want to do here is just add a hidden button that we'll call our rule. Label create rule. So that's the name of the label. And this is the text that it displays. Create rule. And then we'll just add a button to call the rule. Button create. That's fine. Create. I would probably take this out before actually going to production too, but it doesn't hurt to have it in. Okay, and I'm going to do one other thing because of this. So first I'm going to add a parameter called debug. And this one will have a Boolean. And in my initialize method, I'm going to add another condition. And this will be another parameter condition. So I search for para for parameter. If a view parameter has a specific value, so if debug has a value of true, then we'll go to actions. I'm searching for show here. Show a control. And that will be table debug. Okay. Finish. I'll just refresh this here. We don't see our debug things, but in the URL here, I'm just going to add question mark debug equals true. And hopefully this then displays our table. Good. We don't see anything for status here. I'm going to say first test, create. We don't have any feedback. We actually probably should have put the ID in there too, so we could see that. But we can test this in a few ways. The most direct way to test this is to go to SQL itself, go to HR request, script table as, select 1000, select to new query. Oh, select top 1000 rows. It's late at night. I don't see my request. Something did not work. So let's take a look. Oh, I didn't map this button to a rule. So let's go edit this, create. I'm going to go to rules. This is the same thing as doing it here, but here it's just usually saves you a click. When the control is clicked, then I'm going to do actions, search for rule, execute another rule, and the rule will be our create or update. Added that in, I save that here. So once I refresh this, I will be able to see the change. First test again, and I'll click create. It did something. We saw a little pause there. We would see a web request if we debugged. Now I'm going to execute this query again, and we have all our expected fields. We don't see status there though. All right, now I'm just going to refresh this again to clear things, and we're going to test the load method. in the initialize branch. So this time I'll put request ID equals to 1. Request ID, I think is what I named it. Then we'll go there and you can see that it actually loaded the item again. So if I went to another number, 2 for example, nothing will be loaded, but if I go back to 1, I'll see that there. Okay, good. So for now, that's all we need on that view. The next view we're going to create, so I'll click finish here. And check it in, will be our responses. So there could be multiple responses here that go back and forth. So we'll go new view. We'll go new view this time just to do it differently. Not too big of a difference here. HR request. All right, and this will be responses. And this will be a list view. So I think this is simple enough or easy enough for, at least for a simple application, a naming convention. It helps to have a naming convention, but me personally, I'm not very specific about how that naming convention is done, as long as that's consistent and followed. This will be a list view because here we're going to be displaying multiple responses, the data source. So now we have to go to our HR request system, our SmartObjects, responses. List, we'll leave this checked. Leaving this box checked will just create a rule for us. We can delete it later. It's not a big deal. All right, and now we'll create labels and controls. And here we'll add request date or response date from HR and created by display name. We don't need list editing here, although we will have to add a response. So we'll have to figure out how to do that. Maybe we'll do that in a separate view, or maybe we'll do it above. Okay. So let's move these columns around. We'll put created by here. And I'm selected on this column and I'm going to do some editing here on the right side. So here's the column name itself, that's standard. And the header, this is where I could actually change this. And I'll say comment by. The body will still look the same. And for response date, I'll just say date. And we're missing the comment itself. From HR, I'll just call that HR comment. Actually, we'll take that out of there. Do this a little bit different. But what we need is response details here. And we'll just call this response. Make things look a little bit nicer here. One thing we're definitely going to want to do for this is we see those 3 dots, the ellipses. If I'm clicked on the column, I want to click on body, and then I definitely want to wrap text because we're thinking this could be several lines of text here. And we'll save that for now. We'll go to the rules. As I previously stated, we have the initialize rules for us. This I will make an asynchronous method, although it's not going to make a big difference here. And I'm going to configure this also. So actually I'm missing something here. I'll click OK to save this. I'm going to put in the same parameter as request ID as I had before. And we'll use that as a parent ID to get the child items. Save. Now back to the rules and initialize. Going to configure here. this parameter up here, that's the actual parameter we just filled out. I'm going to say request ID. And then we don't need a filter here. Output mappings, we can see this is automatically mapped for us, and we'll save that as it is. Now we don't need an additional, yes, actually we may need an additional method here. Let's actually test this out. I forget this. Almost 10 years experience. Okay. We see nothing in the database because there are no comments in the database. But once we add one, it will only filter it for the ones that we have there for request ID. So I just want to make sure too that by default it doesn't show all comments, and we might have to do the same logic as we had in the header. But we also here, we don't have a spot yet for adding a comment. So we're going to do this in a little bit sloppy of a way to start off with, and maybe improve upon it later. So what I'm going to do here is add a table. And the table will do 2 columns and just 1 row. We'll be able to adjust this later as needed. I can hardly see that. Okay, good. And here we'll put in, actually, we'll make this 1 column using this merge cell button here. And the first thing we want to add is a text area. Probably didn't have to put that in a table. So we'll make this 5 lines, and we'll make the width be, I don't know, let's try 60%. Good. Text area comment. We want to name everything here, label everything. And then we want to add a button. We'll call it add comment. Now I'm not sure if I'm actually going to keep it like that. That's what that pause was for. But we'll do it for that because we probably want to limit to them to 1 comment at a time, not several. So this might actually be done somewhere else on the form. So let's try that out for now. Probably why I should have tested this out a little bit more before I got going. Go to rules, add rule. When the control is clicked, first we'll say if a control contains a value. Or actually we'll use a validation instead. Validate if the view passes validation. And for that configuration we'll say text comment area has a value. Then execute a method on the view. We'll execute the create method here. And that will have the request ID, response date, current date and time, response details, and that will be from controls here, text area, and the current user, display name, and name. Click next. We don't need anything back. We'll click finish. So we'll execute that. And then we're going to use another view method, and that will be refresh, list refresh. So that way we can see the comment in there. So this allows us right now to create a comment without a request ID. So this is bad. We'll have to change that. Oh, we added 2. We'll see that in our database. Let me refresh this list first. Good. Request ID should definitely be added there. But let's take another look at this. So we don't want them adding multiple comments. We want to make sure that there's a request ID before they start this. So we have to manage that. So these just don't show up. If I refresh the whole screen, let's see. This we have to fix too. So if I refreshed and there's no ID specified, it just gave me everything there, or there was no ID specified. So there's a couple of problems with doing it this way. So for now, I'm actually going to hide this table if I can find it. There we go. And maybe we'll add this to the form itself. So I'll check this in, and we'll add the form. Okay, new form. The form name is quite important here, because this will actually be available to the end users, and we'll just call it HR request. We'll go to views from the top left, open our views folder. First we'll add our item view, and then we'll add our list view. We'll keep the theme as default. So one thing we want to do when we add these, so I'll click back on the first one, is uncheck collapsible, and for both the views, I'll call the first view details, responses, or we'll call it overview. Looks quite nice. And one thing we'll add too is a label for the title, called the label title. HR request. So for this style here, I'm going to put this page title. Still looks ugly. Let's try it as subtitle. And we'll try to center this if it lets us. Format. See if that does the trick. No, we have to put that in the table actually to center it. I'm going to leave it as is for now. And what I'm going to do here is add this text box again here. So let's think about this. Let's add first this text area. That does not look good. We'll add it in a table. Table. Oh. Yeah, I'm going to pause. We'll make it 3 by 3 for now. Although we probably don't need that. So I'm going to merge this as we did before. Well, first I'll put in a label. Comment. Comment. And then I'll put in the text area. And we'll make this 5 rows. And then we'll have a button for submit. Button, submit, submit. And the style will be main action. All right, what we have to do here is first, I'm going to add the same parameter as we had before. Request ID. Forget if we capitalize the D or not. The views will load by themselves. We tried to make them as self-contained as possible. But I'm going to add some rules for the submit. So I'll click on the button, click here to add rules. Seems like on forms, I don't get the automatic help like I needed there. And we'll go, you can see we had all the rules there. I'm first going to add another unbound rule. I'll call this new request. And we'll see why we do this later. So the first thing we'll do in this is execute another rule. So the rule will be create or update from the first one. And then we're going to put a transfer data in there. And we're going to do that so we can transfer the parameter from the view to the form. That won't be done automatically for us. So we have to go to this item view, parameters, take this, and put it into the request ID. So the second thing we want to do here is execute a SmartObject method this time. And that will be from what we created here. So HR request, SmartObjects, HR responses. We're just going to add the response. So create. We'll do this how we did before. Request ID is now in the form parameters from before. The date will be current date and time. Response details will be from our controls here. Text area, we need to name that. Created by will be the current user name. Display name and name will be username. And since we know this is going to be on first submit, we can just say false. We actually don't need any output from this. We'll click OK. Remember to map it to our button. First, I'm going to name this text box response. And this will map to our rule. It's annoying that that's not auto mapped. Let me just try that again here. Nope. So what we have to do here is when a control on the form raises an event, so when button submit is clicked. Now, in order to go down this new path, I'm just going to say look for parameter. If a form parameter has been specified, if request ID has been specified, has not been specified actually, then I'm just going to use our unbound rule. So I'll search for a rule here, execute another rule, and the rule will be create or update, or a new request. I'll click finish and give that a quick test. Okay, dates automatically populated for us. Parental leave. We'll say we got to fix this in the view. Let's go ahead and do that now. So back to our list view. Let's go back to our rules to initialize. Click yes to check it out if it's not checked out already. We'll just add a condition to here. Once again, we'll search for a parameter. If a view parameter has been specified, if request ID has been specified, then execute the list method. Not don't. I'll save that. Just go back to our form. Refresh. All right, looks better. We could probably even hide this view on the new request. It would probably make sense. Let's do that. So we'll go into the initialize rule of the form. We'll leave that how it is. And back to the layout, I'm just going to make this not visible. And what we'll do in the rules here, in initializing, go to conditions, and the same thing we've been using the whole time, parameter. If a view parameter has been specified, request ID, then show a view, HR request. Okay, we'll save that, refresh, and we should probably name this details, something like that, but we'll leave that for now. So we'll call this paternity leave. Paternity leave. I would like 4 months off. Can we do this? And we'll click submit. Nothing happened that we see. We saw briefly, maybe you saw it there, some flashes on the screen. We refresh it, we don't see anything. Let's put in request ID to test our load methods. ID equals set 2. Look, awesome. We have all our requests. So we should probably hide the submit button now, hide the comment button unless it's in a workflow. So we still got a bit of work to do, but the next thing I want to do is actually add a workflow and route this to HR. So I'll go back to the designer. Let me finish this. Let me check this in. Check everything in. And now from the top level workflow, I'm just going to add new workflow. And eventually it will come up with something. There we go. Call it HR request with a space this time. All right. So I'm just going to quickly go back over to what our view flow will be like. Let's see. So we just submit a new request. We did that. It will go to the HR team to review. They write a response, and then it goes back to the user to either accept that answer or add some clarification and close the request. All right, so back to our workflow. So first thing we want to do is just a bit of housekeeping in this. And what I will do is, if I click over to the right here and right here again, I will add a variable for request ID. think the workflow is a little bit more strict, so I'm actually going to make this one a number. So I go to settings, number, and that's what we're going to send into the workflow, the request ID. And then from there, I'm going to go to the basic actions. And first thing I'm going to do is create a reference. So I'll go to my SmartObject, HR request, SmartObject, HR request. And the method I'm going to do here is read. So what this actually does is just whenever we need information about this HR request, we can get it from the reference in this context browser on the right. So it doesn't just load it one time, it actually loads it every time we need that. So if properties change from some other system, we have that there. So I'll click create, and now I have this HR request, and I could use these fields whenever I need. The second little bit of housekeeping that we have to do here is set the folio. We'll do this in a separate step. Usually I combine them together. So the folio will be the workflow instance name. So from this, I'll say HR request and I'll use the request subject. 500 characters would probably be a bit much, and I'll also put in the request ID. Okay. Now the next thing we want to do is add a task. So I just grabbed that from over there. We'll call this HR task and route that there. Now there's a bit of work to do for a task to do this. So first we have to add the action. So we'll just say complete response or respond. There will only be one thing here. I don't typically use instructions. We're going to attach this to a form, and how we do this is we don't use basic task form, but we're going to actually use custom here. And I actually did another video about that. We're going to put in the URL from the form. And we're going to do that in a way where if we use package and deployment, it will still use the relative environment from the other environments, the relative URL. So what we're going to search for is runtime SmartForm runtimes SSL. And this will take us all the way here in the URL, so we just have to put an HR request after this, or at least I believe so. Something I happened to get wrong the whole time. It will automatically add a parameter of serial number for us. What I'll add here is request ID and put in our request ID. I could either do it from the variable or from the reference. They should be the same thing. And I'll actually make it like this. So that will take the HR representative to this form. I'm going to keep this at originator for now, but obviously that should be somebody else. We won't do any email. And we'll keep this at first response. So after it goes to HR, we usually have one of these decision blocks afterwards, and I'll put it in. But there's only one thing they can do here, so we actually don't need this. So I'll delete that out. And what I'll do is back to the user, and we'll have a task for accept response. And we'll do this in the same way. So we'll say accept response. Further clarification needed. OK. Do our form in the same type of way. Runtime. Put that in before. It could be a little bit tricky here sometimes. And we want request ID as for parameter. Okay, that makes sense as the originator. And we'll keep everything else as default. Now I'll grab one of these decisions here. And this time when I connect the arrow, we'll see the two different outcomes here. So for further clarification needed, we'll route this back to HR. You can pull this out a little bit to make it nicer. And if it's accepted, we'll go to end the workflow. This is the end workflow, but before we do that, I'm going to add in a SmartObject method here. Connect the lines, and we'll name this update status. And we'll use this in a few places, actually. So we have our HR requests here. The method we will use is update. Request ID will be here, and then we'll pick the property that we want to update, and that will be status to completed. Good. We'll also do, if we click on this, we can copy and paste. We'll put an update status here. Make sure it's actually before the user task, and we'll update this to we're waiting user response. And we'll also paste that one more time in further clarification needed, and update that to further clarification. And we just got to connect the arrows there. And back to HR. Okay. Let's just make this flow a little bit nicer here. I think that looks a little bit funny. Good. And this thing just has to be nice. Should be nice and legible. And let's deploy this. So we'll go to File, Deploy. Okay, great. I go over to Management now. Into Workflows, I see HR request, and I can see this workflow hasn't been run. Okay, now that we have this workflow, we have to start the workflow. So I'm going to close out of this. I'm going to go back to our HR request form. I'm going to go to the rules and new request. I'm going to click on that, and I'm actually going to call that submit new request. Okay, so those are creating the items in the database. From the actions, I'm searching for workflow, start a workflow, and we want this to be our HR request workflow. We go to configure, and the only thing that we have to put in here is the request ID. Click finish. And let's add one more thing here. And say, give them a message. So we search for a message, we have so message. I would normally navigate them away afterwards too, but let's keep it confirmation and we'll say your request was submitted. And I'll put in the parameter there too. Okay, good. Click finish. I won't check it in yet because I know we have a little bit more work to do. Please ignore this add copy button. Just a script gone crazy. Okay, we have a request ID there. I'm going to take that out so we get the new form. Subject, maternity leave. I want time off. Okay, we'll submit. We have our message, our request was submitted, number 3. Now if we go to management, if I refresh this list, I see that a workflow has started. If I click on it and click view flow, I can see that it's awaiting the HR task. Now, in order to access this task, I'm actually going to go to the K2 workspace. We could build a dashboard for this later, and that will just be, but for right now, while debugging, I'll use a workspace since there's a task list there. Probably waking up the site here. Go to my inbox, HR task, file now found. Uh-oh, we messed something up. Probably the URL. Let's say view frame source, since this is an iframe. Runtime. We forgot form. So what we need to do is add that form there and take away this view source in the beginning. Good. This is what we're looking for. However, we see the comment from the user, everything they need. There's still a couple of things wrong though. They can add a comment. They can't complete the task though. Submit would just add a new one, right? So let's just fix this where they can HR can actually add the reply, and in the workflow itself, we'll make sure to add that. So I'm going to go back to my form designer. And let's go to our initializing rule. So one thing in the workflow, we noticed that it added a parameter for us, serial number. Yeah, we see that there. Doesn't mean we actually added the parameters here. So I'm just going to put SN for serial number. And now I'm going to go to the initializing rule. All right, so we show that. I'm going to put an else here. So if the request ID has been specified, if it will show the list view. Oh, actually, and we'll go to actions and we'll just hide that submit button. Well, no, we actually could leave it there. What we want to do though, show that we want to make the one view read only. So let's see. For this, we want set a views property. We could set that to read only. Maybe we'll do that. The item view. Okay, good. And what about the submit button? We probably want to hide that, so we have a nice read-only view too. But let's think about that in a bit. What we do want to do is handle the task. So I think we can leave it that as is. Oh. And this doesn't give us what we need. Specify the view state for form controls. So this is what we want to do. So in the request itself, we're just going to make everything read only. Well, maybe not the table. All right, let's look at our submit button. So if the request ID has not been specified, we go down that path. So for a new, we can add a comment to that. New request. We want another condition here though. So if there is a parameter, like there was on my task, serial number has been specified. And we're going to have another little issue here. We're going to say, well, first we want to add a request. So we'll execute a SmartObject method once again to add the comment. From HR, so create. From HR will be true in this case. We need the request ID. Response date, do that as date and time. The details will be from the same box as it was before. Text area response. And the created by will be here again. Display name and name for username. We don't need any output from that. We want to also complete the task itself. So if we search task here, actually work. Action a work list item. This we could put anything on, it doesn't matter. We'll say it to the proper one, but the only thing that's really important here is the serial number. So for our parameters, we want serial number. And the action name, they only have one action. So we'll just make sure we got that right, the name. I'm just going to the workflow and checking that out so I don't have to come back here. All right. The actions they can take is respond. Action name will be respond. And then we'll just give them a message. HR task completed. Good. So we could actually test that out in this request already. No time off. Let's submit it. Let's see what happens. It was completed. Awesome. Now if we refresh this, we can see the response there. We still have to highlight it. This is from HR, but we can see that there. We also have to hide this after it's submitted, but we'll work on that too. Okay, so the next part in the workflow is for the user themselves, and they have to either accept or reject a task. So let's go back to this designer. So we need to distinguish what user is getting this task and if it's the HR task or the other task. So there's a couple of different ways we could do that. And first, to do that, I'm going to add a data label. I'll actually use this hidden table approach like we had before. So I'll add a table. 3x3 is fine. We're calling it debug again. And by default, it will not be visible. Label. Task name. There's a few different types of ways we can do this, but this is the way I most commonly do it. Task name, and then data label. Task name. Okay, so now we have a place where we can store the task name. What we got to do here is add a rule, or in the initializing rule, if a parameter has been specified for serial number, has been specified. First thing we're going to do is open a work list item. We'll be opening the task or just getting information about the task and actually checking the permission. Once again, it doesn't matter what we choose here. What is important is the serial number. So we'll take that from the parameter. And then we're actually going to use some output mappings here. So we have some information about the workflow itself. And even though this is a wrong task, I am still able to take the description or display name, yes, display name, and put that into our task name here to view the task. And then what we'll do there is add some rules to hide some buttons depending on the task name. One more thing in initializing, since I added this debug table, I just have to add the same thing here. Search for debug, not debug, it's getting too late. Parameter. If a form parameter has a specific value, not serial number, and we have to add debug. Cancel this. Parameters. Debug. Make that Boolean. Go back to our rules. Okay. Parameter. Oh, has a specific value. True. Then show the table. Show a form control. Table debug. All right. Saved. Beautiful. I'm going to refresh here. Yep, we have a accept response task, and we have the same error as we did before. So once again, view frame source. Take this off. Put the form back into the URL. And add a query string parameter for debug equals true. Accept response. So based on this changing, we can change what buttons are here for the user to do that. So let's add that to the form and this will hopefully finish up the form. So I'm just going to go directly on this. Add a rule. Jeez. When a control on the form raises an event. So when data label task name is changed, if a control on a form contains a specific value. So data label task name, if it contains what we have here. So accept response. Then we'll show a control that we don't have yet. So I'm just going to put transfer data in there. There's a couple different ways to do this. That's why I'm a little bit slow. And what we'll have here is a radio button group. We'll call it task options. This will actually not give us what we want. We can't actually populate list buttons here. So what I'm going to do is add 2 buttons to make this fast. We're going to say button accept response or submit further clarifications. By default, we'll make these not visible. And we'll go back to this rule. Transfer data. We'll hide the submit button. Hide a form control. And show the other 2. And now we just have to hook these up to rules. Action or work list item. Doesn't matter. What does matter is the serial number and the action name. We're actually hard coding it in this one. This has to be spelled obviously the exact same way. And then for submit further clarification, we'll do the same thing. Once again, this doesn't matter. Only the spelling here matters and the serial number. Okay. Good. We also have to add the same SmartObject method to add the comment again, so we can do this loop. Responses, create, request ID, current date and time, display name, name per user, from HR will be false. And we need a text box and no output. Then we'll just add a message. Okay. Let's check this all in. Let's fix our workflow URLs here. Form was missing. And let's publish this. Deploy it. And let's give it a try. All right. HR request. Need arrays. I need more money. Submit. Okay, we have request ID 4 there. Go back to our workspace, refresh. HR has their task. Now it's loading. We see their comment. We can't click here anymore, so that's good. You can't have one. We'll submit. HR task was completed. Awesome. Now we get a chance to accept the response. And we'll add something to that. Oh, look at this. This didn't work. We need to see two different things here. So let's just take a quick look at that. Frame source. What we're going to do here is add our debugged parameter. And debug equals true. Accept response. Let's see what went wrong. This has changed. What? Let's take a look. Hide the button submit. Did I spell that right? refresh. Well, what we'll do here, just because we're going on a bit here, execute another rule. See if that's not getting hit for some reason. Okay, good. Let's go back to this here. Actually, I have to refresh the page. It gets cached here. Good. Now, no, I want more money. Submit. Good. We see the response. Too bad. Find another job. Submit. Refresh. Now the user has to accept the response. We'll say, okay, fine, you win. Accept response. And there's no more task. If we go to the workflow itself, if I go to reports, I can see the past ones. So that was number 4. If I click on view flow, I can see what actually happened there. Okay, I think I'm going to end it for now. We didn't do the dashboard form. If I get some comments or likes or whatever, or maybe I'll just do a part 2. Who knows? Maybe in the future that will be needed. And we can kind of, with the dashboard form 2, we'll work on read-only form of the view. We're almost there, but we just have to add a couple of pieces, make sure no buttons show up. Then furthermore, I want to add some nice comments for that to make that text a little bit better than that list view as a little bonus. Takes a lot of time, so please like, comment, subscribe. Let me know if you want me to do any other videos. Have a good day, and thanks for watching.